There's someone you think about every single day. Not occasionally, not just when you're lonely. I mean, he slips into your mind while you're driving, while you're working, while you're pretending to listen to someone else talk. Sometimes it's exhausting how automatic it feels, like your mind reaches for him before you even realize it's happening. And what's strange is, part of you already knows this isn't random, because people don't live inside your head for no reason, especially when you've tried to move on, especially when you've told yourself, this is getting ridiculous now, why am I still thinking about him? So tonight, I want to talk to the man sitting alone with that question in his chest. And if somewhere during this video you feel a little too understood, subscribe. Not because I need it, but because some conversations are hard to find twice when you actually need them. The first thing happening when someone is on your mind every day is not what most people think. It's not always love. That's the uncomfortable part. Sometimes your mind keeps replaying a person because your emotional world never got to finish what it started with him. See, men are often taught to measure connection through outcomes. Did it become a relationship? Did she stay? Did it work? But the brain doesn't care about labels the way the ego does. The brain cares about emotional interruption. A conversation that almost became something. A woman who looked at you in a way nobody else did, then disappeared emotionally before you could understand what it meant. A connection that felt emotionally unsafe and emotionally intoxicating at the exact same time. Those experiences don't leave cleanly. Your mind circles them because unresolved emotional tension creates psychological attachment, especially in men who don't normally allow themselves to feel deeply in everyday life. And I think a lot of men watching this secretly know that. You miss her most at night, don't you? Not because nights are magical, but because distraction finally loses its grip. During the day, you can perform your life. You can answer messages, make money, go to the gym, laugh at things, keep moving. But late at night, your real emotional patterns crawl out from underneath the noise. And suddenly your mind goes back to her voice, her silence, that one sentence she said months ago that somehow still stings. You replay tiny details because emotionally significant memories are rarely logical memories. They're sensory, emotional, fragmented. That's why you don't just remember her. You remember how you felt becoming a different version of yourself around her. That's what haunts people. Not always the person. Sometimes it's who they almost became. And here's where this gets deeper. A man can think about a woman every day without admitting to himself that she activated parts of him he had buried for years. Need, fear, tenderness, even grief. Especially grief. Not necessarily grief over losing her. Grief over realizing how emotionally disconnected he was before she arrived. That realization changes people quietly. A lot of men don't cry when relationships end. They become mentally restless instead. They scroll more, work more, sleep with people they don't even like very much. Tell themselves they're fine, while emotionally revisiting the same woman every single day, like a ritual they didn't choose. And if that's happening to you, I don't think you're weak. I think your mind is trying to force you to notice something your ego keeps trying to outrun. The second thing happening when someone is on your mind every day is harder to admit. Your brain has quietly turned him into an emotional reference point, and once that happens, even ordinary moments start passing through him before they reach you. You hear a song and immediately wonder if he'd like it. You accomplish something and imagine telling him first. You see another woman smile at you, and instead of feeling excited, your mind compares the feeling automatically. That comparison part is important, because this is where men become confused. They think they're stuck on someone because the feelings are intense. But intensity isn't always attachment. Sometimes it's contrast. Sometimes one person disrupted your emotional numbness so deeply that everyone else suddenly feels emotionally flat afterward. And that can be dangerous if you don't understand it, because your memory starts editing reality. You stop remembering the full human being and start remembering emotional impact. There's a difference, a huge difference. You forget the inconsistency, the mixed signals, the anxiety, the moments you felt uncertain around him. But your nervous system remembers how alive you felt. And unfortunately, the human mind will often choose familiar emotional pain over unfamiliar emotional peace. especially if your life has been emotionally restrained for a long time. I've noticed something interesting about men who cannot stop thinking about one specific person. Usually, they're not obsessive in most areas of life. They're controlled, logical, independent. That's exactly why this experience shakes them, because it bypasses the systems they normally use to stay emotionally protected. And once that happens, they start negotiating with themselves internally. Maybe I should text her. Maybe I imagined the connection. Maybe she thinks about me too. Maybe if timing was different, that maybe becomes addictive. Not because you're irrational, because uncertainty creates emotional loops the brain desperately wants to close. Psychologically, certainty calms us. Uncertainty consumes us. That's why men can move on faster from clear rejection than from confusing emotional almost relationships. An almost relationship leaves room for fantasy, and fantasy is incredibly persuasive when loneliness gets involved, especially quiet loneliness, not the dramatic kind, the kind where your life looks functional from the outside, but internally, nobody really sees you. Then one person comes along and suddenly you feel emotionally witnessed. That feeling changes men more than they admit. A woman doesn't even have to fully love a man for him to become deeply attached to the experience of being emotionally understood by her. That's the part people rarely say out loud. Men are starving for emotional recognition in ways society barely acknowledges. Not praise, not attention, recognition. To feel like someone looked past the performance and saw the exhausted human underneath it. And when that happens, your mind doesn't let go easily. Even if the connection was brief, even if it ended badly, even if logically you know it probably wouldn't work long term, your emotional brain keeps returning to the moment because part of you is still asking, was that real? But there's another layer underneath all of this. Sometimes the reason someone stays in your mind every day is because your life itself has become emotionally too small. And suddenly one person carries all your longing, your need for connection, your unmet affection, your curiosity, your hope, your escape. That's a dangerous amount of emotional weight to place on one human being, because eventually you stop missing them accurately and start using them as a container for everything you feel is missing inside yourself. The third thing when someone is on your mind every day is that your identity is starting to reorganize itself around the absence. And most men don't notice this while it's happening. At first, it just feels like thinking about her too much. But slowly, your routines begin adapting to an emotional vacancy you never intended to create. You check your phone without realizing why. You replay old conversations while brushing your teeth. You imagine future scenarios with someone who may no longer even exist in your life the way she once did. And what makes this psychologically complicated is that the mind hates unfinished emotional stories. It keeps trying to continue them internally. That's why some men stay emotionally attached for months or years, not because the relationship was perfect, but because the emotional narrative never reached a satisfying conclusion. Human beings can tolerate pain surprisingly well. What destroys us quietly is ambiguity, not knowing what was real, not knowing if we mattered, not knowing whether we should let go or hold on one more day. So the brain keeps revisiting the person like touching a bruise, not to heal, to check if it still hurts. And every time it does, part of you interprets the pain as proof the connection meant something. That's why emotional attachment can become strangely self-reinforcing. You think about her. You feel emotion. The emotion makes her feel important, so you think about her again. And underneath all of that, there's usually something much more vulnerable happening. You're grieving the version of yourself that existed when hope still felt possible. That sentence lands differently when you've lived it. Because sometimes a woman enters a man's life during a very specific emotional season. Maybe he was becoming softer, more open, more optimistic. Maybe for the first time in years he stopped feeling emotionally numb. Then she leaves, or changes, or pulls away emotionally, and suddenly he isn't just mourning her. He's mourning the emotional atmosphere that existed around her. The energy, the anticipation, the feeling that life was about to become more meaningful. And after it disappears, regular life can feel unbearably quiet. That silence affects men more deeply than they admit. especially men who already carry loneliness privately. You know what I've learned? A lot of men don't actually fear rejection the most. They fear emotional insignificance. The idea that someone could enter their inner world, change them permanently, and then continue living unaffected. That thought hurts people in ways they struggle to explain, because men are often conditioned to hide emotional dependency from themselves. So instead of saying, "I miss her deeply," they say, "I just can't stop thinking about her." It sounds safer, more controlled, but emotionally the meaning underneath is often the same. And this is where many men accidentally trap themselves. They start treating emotional attachment like evidence that they've found the one. But intense emotional fixation does not always mean compatibility. Sometimes it means your unmet emotional needs found a powerful target. That distinction matters, because if you don't understand the difference, you'll romanticize emotional suffering and call it destiny. You'll confuse anxiety for chemistry, emotional unpredictability for depth, longing for love. And the terrifying thing is, the brain can become attached to longing itself, to the ache, to the fantasy, to the emotional stimulation of wanting someone just out of reach, especially if calm love feels unfamiliar to you, especially if chaos has always felt emotionally convincing. That's why some men secretly lose interest when someone healthy finally loves them clearly, because peace feels emotionally quieter than pursuit, and they mistake quiet for emptiness. But real emotional connection usually feels less cinematic than obsession, more steady, more honest, less intoxicating, and yes, sometimes less exciting at first, but emotionally healthier. The problem is, many men only realize this after spending years chasing people who activated their wounds instead of healing them. The fourth thing happening when someone is on your mind every day is that your body has probably started participating in the attachment long before your mind admitted it. People talk about attraction like it's only emotional or physical. It's neither. It's neurological. That's why certain people can affect your appetite, your sleep, your concentration, even your sense of time. You don't just like them. Your nervous system starts anticipating them. And once anticipation enters the body, absence becomes physical too. That's why some men feel exhausted after trying to move on. Not dramatic, just drained. Like they've been carrying an invisible conversation in their head for months. Because emotionally unresolved attachment consumes mental energy constantly, even in silence, especially in silence. You know what's heartbreaking? A lot of men don't realize how emotionally isolated they are until one person makes them feel emotionally alive again. And when that person disappears, the contrast becomes brutal. Suddenly, the apartment feels quieter, food tastes flatter, conversations feel performative, even success feels strangely hollow for a while. Not because your life has no value without her, but because emotional connection changes how the brain experiences reality itself. Connection adds color, meaning, expectation. Without it, life can temporarily feel emotionally muted. And some men become ashamed of that reaction. They think, "Why am I affected this much?" Because you're human, that's why. Not weak, not pathetic, human. But here's the truth most people avoid saying clearly. Sometimes you are not actually attached to the person anymore. You're attached to the emotional pattern. There's a difference. A man can spend years thinking about someone he no longer truly knows. Not the real current version of her, just the emotionally preserved version living in his memory. The smile stays perfect there. The chemistry stays unfinished there. The hope never fully dies there. Reality cannot compete with idealization very easily. That's why memory becomes seductive. It removes friction. And loneliness quietly edits old relationships into emotional masterpieces they never actually were. I've sat with men who described a woman like she was the love of their life, then slowly admitted they were anxious around her most of the time, confused, uncertain, afraid of saying the wrong thing, constantly trying to earn emotional reassurance. That isn't always love. Sometimes that's emotional survival disguised as romance. And men who grew up emotionally unseen are especially vulnerable to this dynamic. Because when affection feels inconsistent, they cling harder. Not out of weakness, out of conditioning. The child inside them learns, love must be chased to be real. So when someone finally gives warmth, attention, emotional intensity, then pulls away unpredictably, the attachment deepens instead of fading. That pattern can follow men for decades without them consciously understanding it. And the scariest part? Some men become so emotionally attached to one unavailable person that they stop noticing available life around them. Opportunities pass. Healthy women pass. Years pass. Meanwhile, emotionally, they're still sitting in an old conversation that ended a long time ago. That realization hurts, because eventually there comes a moment, usually late at night if we're honest, when a man quietly asks himself something he's been avoiding for months. Am I holding on to her? Or holding on to the feeling that she temporarily rescued me from myself? Those are not the same thing. And the answer changes everything. The fifth thing happening when someone is on your mind every day is the part most men don't want to face. Because at some point, this stops being about her entirely and starts becoming about what your mind is still trying to resolve inside you. There's a moment I've seen in men, quiet, almost private, where the attachment begins to shift shape. They don't talk about her as much out loud anymore, but internally she's still there, not as a person, as a presence, a habit of thought, a reflex the mind returns to when things go still. And what's really happening underneath that is something deeper than longing. It's unfinished emotional self-recognition. You see, when someone becomes embedded in your thoughts like this, your mind is not just replaying them, it's replaying you in relation to them. Who you were when you felt chosen, who you were when you felt uncertain, who you were when you felt alive in a way you can't fully recreate on demand. And the danger is, the brain starts to confuse emotional intensity with meaning. So the story becomes, if I think about her this much, she must have been significant in a way no one else can match. But significance isn't always what your nervous system believes it is in the moment. Sometimes it's just the strongest emotional imprint your life has produced so far. And your mind doesn't easily let go of strong imprints, because letting go would mean accepting something quieter, more ordinary, more grounded. And for some men, that feels like loss, even if it's actually healing. Here's what I want you to understand gently but clearly. The reason she stays in your mind every day is not because you are still in a story with her. It's because part of your emotional system never received closure on what she activated in you. And closure is not something another person gives you, not fully, not permanently. Closure is something your mind slowly learns when it stops needing the fantasy to complete itself. That takes time. And honesty, not denial, not chasing, not reopening conversations that already emotionally ended. Just recognition. That what you felt was real in your body, but not necessarily meant to become your lifelong direction. And there's a subtle shift that happens when a man finally begins to understand this. He doesn't suddenly forget her. That's not how human attachment works. But the emotional charge begins to weaken. The loops get quieter. The need to mentally revisit the same scenes starts losing urgency. And one day he notices something strange. He went a whole afternoon without thinking about her. And instead of panic, there's just silence. Neutrality, space. And in that space, something important returns. Not her, him. His attention, his presence, his life moving forward without being filtered through an absence. And maybe that's the part nobody tells you in a dramatic way. You don't heal by forcing someone out of your mind. You heal when your mind finally understands there is nothing left to solve there. Just memory, just emotion, just a chapter that did what it came to do. And ended. And when that understanding settles in slowly, quietly, you stop asking why she's still in your head every day, and start realizing something more important. Your mind was never trying to punish you. It was trying to finish a story your heart didn't know how to close.